Hi, Darren Levine from MediaHell.com here interviewing Tremel Hudson, who's been doing some fantastic work modifying the firmware of the Canon 5D Mark II to give us video filmmakers a little more control. Tremel, pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Darren.
So a lot of people have been extraordinarily enjoying your work, and we just want to have a few questions for you, see how things are going. And first off, we want to know, what's your background?
Well, been working with computers a long time on high-performance computing. Always been an amateur filmmaker, and got into amateur filmmaking when I bought a 5D Mark II earlier in this year.
So that was your first forte into video, was the 5D?
That's right.
Excellent. And so what caused you to go into modifying the firmware? Was it because of a need or a desire or people bugging you because they knew you can probably do it?
It was an absolute need that with the early firmware, there were a lot of limitations. We shot a bunch of shorts with our camera lenses twisted off to be able to preserve aperture. Very high level of frustration despite the beautiful images that were coming out.
Yeah, everyone wants that high image quality and was desperate enough to get it by unscrewing their lenses a little bit to remove the contacts and put fake things, all the wonderful stuff that we remember doing. But how did Canon's firmware updates affect your development of Magic Lantern?
Well, it causes me a little bit of work. I have to go through their firmware files, find all of the symbols that, or the functions that my firmware calls, and update a symbol table so that we can call those functions correctly. It's a lot of work, but I'm really glad that Canon is releasing these firmware updates because they're improving what's already a great camera. And every time they release a firmware, they add new features that make it better. And I'm hoping that my features also improve it and help everyone else who's making films with their 5D.
And speaking of Canon, you're kind of the one name that's attached to modifying their firmware. Have they contacted you at all?
Surprisingly not. I'd love to hear from them and hear what their thoughts are. The closest I've heard is a brief call out from Tim Smith at the Digital Cinema Society, where he was talking about the 5D being developed for photojournalists, not for filmmakers. And it sounded that he might be suggesting folks check out my software for filmmaking.
As much as he probably wouldn't be able to, just like, hey guys, he's over here, you go to him, he knows what he's doing. Great. And so what do you have planned for your next release? As we know, you've added a few basic things that we need, like audio levels and whatnot for the current release of Magic Lantern. But what do you have planned for the next release?
Well, the next release, which is hopefully going to be coming out sometime soon, will add support for the Canon 7D, if that support turns out not to be too much effort. We'll have SMPTE timecode jamming, where we can set the camera clock to a remote time source. We'll have support for external devices on the USB. We might have 1080i output on the HDMI while recording, although there are still some issues with that. That's a very...
I think that's probably the biggest one people are looking for.
There are a lot of folks are requesting that one. Right now I'm having some problems related to the rolling shutter and synchronization of the HDMI output with the recording. So that may or may not prove insurmountable, and it may have to wait until a future release.
I see. Do you think that you can also tinker with the bitrate or codec settings of the 5D or 7D as well?
I've experimented a little bit with it on the 5D without success yet. The 7D, as you know, can do 48 megabits per second versus the 40 on the 5D. And I've tried using those parameters on the 5D, but currently it fills the compact flash buffer and aborts the recording.
So you think it's more of a compact flash buffering problem than the 7D having two processors versus the 5D's one?
It may be a dual digit thing, it may be an older compact flash hardware thing. At this point, without any documentation, I just don't know.
Which Canon doesn't want to give you, do they?
They don't.
Well, we're still rooting for you on that. There's also been some concerns with the 5D about moire, aliasing, and its slightly too high contrast of an image for us filmmakers to properly do any color grading or whatnot. Are those things, or any of them that you've tried, been successful in your tinkerings?
I've been working with doing a windowed sensor read, which will read just a small part at the center of the sensor, which is exactly what the digital zoom function does before you start recording. The interesting thing is at the 10 times zoom level, it's actually reading every single line.
Instead of was it 1 out of every 3 lines?
Exactly. And since there's no line skipping, that means that there's no aliasing. It does appear there's some higher noise levels associated with that, but this is very promising. It probably won't be in the next release, so we'll probably have to wait until after Canon's upcoming 24p firmware for the 5D.
But rest assured, you are still hard on it. I think you told me that this is encompassing most of your spare time, and on top of the regular world that you have to live in.
This is pretty much most of my spare time.
Well, we all certainly appreciate that with you. Is there anything else non-firmware related that you've been tinkering with that you'd like to mention?
Well, I've been working with bringing external device control to the 5D. I've been
The USB?
over the USB to be able to start and stop recording, do remote follow focus. I've been working with the Impero remote from ViewFactor, which is a Bluetooth follow focus that will allow the camera to be mounted on a jib or a crane and or a Steadicam, and have a follow focus operator or the DP control zoom, control the focus, control the iris, and have full control over the camera.
That sounds fantastic. One of my more important questions to finish up is, in all of your work, your many hours spent, have people donated to you for this?
They have. I've had a lot of very generous donations from a lot of users. We probably have around 1,000 users, maybe 2,000. There have been about 3,000 downloads of the software. And I've received several hundred emails from folks saying that they've successfully installed it and used it, and no reports yet of any bricked cameras or any damage. So I'm really pleased.
But if you do break your camera, disclaimer, not this man's responsibility.
It's not my fault. And other folks have donated equipment, and I also have some commercial sponsors who have been very generous in equipment donations, and that have allowed me to experiment with different external devices and moving forward with new features for the 5D.
Most excellent. Well, check out Trammell Hudson's work on Vimeo, Cinema 5D, Wiki, Google. Any of those you can search for Magic Lantern. He chose a name unique enough to get his hits high enough that you'll probably see as a first result in most of those.
Right now, I think it's the first hit for Magic Lantern on Google.
Excellent. Well, this has been Trammell Hudson with his work on Magic Lantern, the firmware for the 5D Mark II. Trammell, thank you for coming out.
Thank you, Darren.